Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a hidden dynamic that we all participate in, usually without even realizing it, the psychology of retail motivation. We're going to break down the exact, invisible forces that drive us to make a purchase, leaning directly on some genuinely fascinating data and historical research. So, if you've ever wondered about the structural framework operating behind your own shopping habits, well, you are in the perfect place.
But before we get into the heavy theory, I want to anchor this concept to your everyday reality. Why do we buy what we buy? Really think about it. You walk into a grocery store with a single, highly specific mission: pick up a gallon of milk, right? But 20 minutes later, you walk out with the milk, sure, but also 2 bags of artisanal chips, a new brand of sparkling water, and, I don't know, some premium chocolate. Was that a carefully calculated decision, or did it feel entirely spontaneous? Well, as our research today shows, there's a complex, structured framework operating behind the scenes of every single transaction we make. It's almost never just a random event.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for The Explainer today. First, we'll cover retailing customer motivation, then the drive to purchase, followed by the decision-making process. After that, we'll look at the Industrial Revolution and consumers, and finally, we'll wrap it all up with our final takeaways.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, Retailing Customer Motivation, Unpacking the Spark.
Okay, let's establish our baseline here. Consumer motivation is defined by the specific underlying factors that literally push a person to initiate a purchase. We aren't just talking about the physical act of walking through the automatic doors of a store. We're talking about that initial psychological spark. What is that invisible push? Our sources emphasize that understanding these specific factors is absolutely crucial. It is step number 1 in analyzing retail behavior. To get detailed here, let's look at what these drivers actually look like in the wild. Sometimes they're deeply physiological, like pure, undeniable hunger prompting you to grab a snack at the gas station. But other times, they are psychological or social. It's that desire for status or belonging that motivates someone to, say, purchase a luxury watch or the absolute latest smartphone. Then there's also the motivation of fear or security, which might drive the purchase of a home alarm system or even organic foods. The point is, you really can't understand the shopper without first understanding which of these initial compelling drives is pulling the strings.
Moving right along to Section 2, the drive to purchase, from spark to intention.
Now, this perfectly illustrates the linear flow of how a purchase actually develops. Our research makes a really crucial distinction between simply having a motivation and actually developing an intention to purchase. See, motivation is just the raw desire. It's the I want or I need. Think of it as that sudden rumble in your stomach. That's your motivation. But that feeling has to evolve into an intention. The intention is when your brain decides, okay, I am going to get a slice of pizza from that specific shop across the street. It becomes targeted. Only after that intention is locked in does it result in the final action, actually handing over your credit card. Understanding this middle step, how a totally abstract feeling solidifies into a targeted goal, is a massive focus for retailers. I mean, they don't just want you to be hungry, they want to direct your specific intention toward their specific product. Which brings us to Section 3, the decision-making process, the mechanics of buying.
The data we're looking at is very methodical about this, outlining the formal decision-making process of a consumer in a really clear sequence. Let's systematically walk through these steps so you can see the mechanics in action. First up, the consumer experiences the motivation. They identify a gap, a problem, or a desire. Simple enough. Second, as we just discussed, they form that highly specific purchase intention. But the third step, making the actual decision, is where the real mechanics come into play. See, this isn't just one single sweeping choice, it's a series of rapid-fire micro-decisions. To execute the purchase, a consumer has to evaluate competing alternatives. They're comparing price points, they're aggressively scrolling through online reviews on their phone while standing right there in the aisle, assessing the brand's reputation, and overcoming cognitive friction. They're asking themselves, wait, do I really need to spend this much right now? This phase involves evaluating the physical location of the retailer, the convenience of the transaction, and even checking the return policy. It is a highly mechanical, measurable progression. And retailers, they study this intensely to figure out exactly where people abandon their carts or, conversely, finalize the deal.
All right, let's shift gears quite a bit for Section 4, Industrial Revolution and Consumers, the historical shift. Now, what is absolutely fascinating here is this specific quote pulled straight from our academic sources. The research explicitly notes that we must understand the consumer's decision-making process, quote, especially with the influence of the Industrial Revolution. It is wild to think about, right? To understand modern retail habits like literally tapping a screen to buy a pair of sneakers on your smartphone, we have to anchor ourselves in a historical event from the 18th and 19th centuries. You're probably wondering, why on earth would the steam engine or the power loom matter to our modern shopping carts? Well, it's because the very concept of retail motivation, exactly as we experience it today, was essentially birthed by this historical era. To really grasp what that quote means, we have to contrast two completely different eras of human existence. Before the Industrial Revolution, consumer decisions were largely driven by basic scarcity and absolute need. You bought or traded for what you strictly needed to survive: food, basic clothing, shelter. There wasn't some complex psychological matrix behind buying a pair of boots. You bought them because your old ones completely fell apart. But post-Industrial Revolution, the sudden explosion of mass production completely flipped the script. Suddenly there was a massive surplus of goods. Factories were turning out hundreds of identical products. Consumers weren't just buying out of basic survival anymore, they were buying based on newly formed motivations. And because retailers had warehouses overflowing with surplus, they couldn't afford to just wait around for people to genuinely need things. They had to actively create motivation through advertising, branding, and marketing. The intention to purchase became about choosing between 5 different brands of soap, not just trying to find soap. This historical shift completely altered consumer psychology forever, moving us from a strict needs-based economy to a desire-driven economy.
And that perfectly sets us up for Section 5, Final Takeaways, Mastering the Concepts.
So if you take away anything today, the crucial point is this. To truly grasp the dynamics of retail motivation, you need to firmly lock in these 4 pillars. First, the factors motivating consumers. Whether they're physiological, psychological, or social, you must recognize that initial invisible spark. Second, the intention to purchase. Understanding that a raw desire has to be actively channeled into a specific, targeted goal. Third, the consumer decision-making process. Acknowledging the complex, multi-step sequence of micro-decisions, comparisons, and evaluations that occur literally seconds before the transaction. And lastly, the massive influence of the Industrial Revolution, recognizing that our entire modern framework of desire, surplus, and branding was born from a historical shift away from basic scarcity. I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. The next time you feel the sudden motivation to buy something, anything at all, take a step back and ask yourself, are your daily purchasing decisions truly yours, or are they simply a modern product of the Industrial Revolution? It's a pretty fascinating way to look at our everyday habits, isn't it? Thanks for joining us on The Explainer today, and we'll see you next time.